Hello, one final resurrection reflection, and thank you for joining me again. And this time I'm going to look at what I think is the last sort of main episode of Jesus appearing to one of his disciples, or to all of his disciples, after he's risen from the dead. We do hear some other things in Acts chapter 1 about how he did appear to his disciples several times over the course of the 40 days before he ascended into heaven. But I just want to focus on this final appearance that we're told about in detail. And it's particularly I want to talk about when Jesus restores Peter. So this happens just after Peter and some of the other disciples have been off fishing in the boat, and Jesus has come to them at dawn on the seashore, and he said, throw the nets out the other side and you'll catch some fish. And they take this amazing catch of fish, having caught nothing all night. They come in, they know it's Jesus, and he makes them breakfast on the beach, which is a beautiful picture of him just restoring that relationship with these men who kind of had abandoned him, really, as he died. And then he calls Peter aside, and he begins to ask Peter some questions. And it's important to remember that Peter is the disciple who, in one sense, has always kind of, it's as though he's gone ahead of the others. Oh, Lord, I'm the one who really loves you. I never deny you. I'd never abandon you. I'm even ready to die for you, he says in John 13, just before Jesus himself dies. And yet, a couple of chapters later in John's Gospel, and we read that Peter denied even knowing Jesus, being a follower of Jesus, 3 times as Jesus was being was put on trial. And there was Peter denying his knowledge of Jesus. And think about how that must have pained Peter as soon as he'd done it. And certainly now that there is this, Jesus is alive, this idea that he's let him down so badly. And Jesus takes Peter to one side and he asks him this question. First of all, he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Presumably he means more than the other disciples love me. And I wonder if he's kind of saying, look, Peter, you've always said you're the one who really loves me. Is that true? How could I possibly believe that when you've denied me in the way that you have? And Peter says, Lord, you know I love you. And he's emphatic that you yourself know that I love you. It's as though he's saying, look, Jesus, you know everything. You know my heart. You know I love you. And then Jesus asks him again, do you love me? And again Peter says, Lord, you know I love you. And there's this sense of Peter wanting to say to Jesus, look, why are you asking me this question? You know. And then the third time that Jesus says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? We're told Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. Now, partly I guess that he's hurt because Jesus is continuing to ask, and it's almost as if he's not believing him. But I think maybe the main reason it hurts him the third time is because, we can see, looking here, 3 times Peter denied Jesus. 3 times Jesus restores Peter, asks him if he loves him. But this was going on for the first time. Peter didn't know how many times Jesus was going to ask him. And when he asks him the third time, I wonder if there's that sense for Peter of, I denied Jesus 3 times. He's reminding me of that with this third question. And that's painful. It hurts Peter. But the reason why Jesus does it, I think, is because Peter has to confront what he's done. He can't just forget about the fact that he's denied Jesus and pretend it never happened. He has to face it head on, and he has to realize that Jesus is healing him, is restoring him, is saying, look, I know you did that, but now a new start. Now there's the opportunity to leave that behind. I'm restoring you to that place of friendship, of brotherly love with me. And that's true for all of us, I think. If we're going to be restored by Jesus, if we're going to be healed from the things that we've done wrong and forgiven, we've got to acknowledge that we do those things. We've got to acknowledge our sin. We've got to acknowledge the times when we've rebelled against God and ignored him and turned away from him. The wrongdoing that's there in our lives, because we can't pretend that it never happened. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. We've got to acknowledge it so that Jesus can speak those words of healing over us. And that's what he does here for Peter. And it's a powerful moment, but it hurts Peter to have to really deal with that rejection of Jesus that was there in his past. And he says the third time, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Peter is saying, look, he knows that Jesus knows everything. He knows that Jesus can see into his heart. And it's true for us too. Jesus might well ask us these questions because actually it helps us to deal with them, us to think through them. But he can see into our hearts. We can't pull the wool over his eyes, and nor do we need to fear that he doesn't really know that we love him, because he can see into our hearts. If we love Jesus, if we desire to follow Jesus, he knows that. He knows that we may make some mistakes, but he knows that we love him. And that's very, very important for us to realize. And each time when he asks this question and Peter responds, Jesus then says to Peter a commission, a task for him. Feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. He's calling Peter to be a pastor, a shepherd over Jesus's people. He's calling Peter to be a leader of those people, to care for them, to feed them. And Peter goes back to this in his own letter, 1 Peter chapter 5. It means a lot to him that he is to be a shepherd of God's people. And some of us will have that same calling upon us to be shepherds of God's people, to care for and feed others. But whatever it is that Jesus says to you, he will give you a calling. He will give you a task. He will commission you to serve him and to follow him in a particular way. So listen out for what it is that Jesus is asking you to do. He wants to know that you love him, but if you do, he will have plenty for you to do in this world. And once Peter is commissioned and restored, it's worth us realizing that what Jesus is asking him to do is not easy. In verses 18 and 19 we're told, Jesus predicts to Peter, when you're older, you will die for me. You will stretch out your hands. Others will dress you and take you to where you don't want to go. He will be martyred for his faith. And John explains that to us in verse 19. It's not going to be an easy road that Peter takes in obeying and loving Jesus, but it will be the right one. And in fact, when Peter writes his letter, his first letter, he describes the glorious and inexpressible joy that we feel in knowing Jesus. It's worth so much more than any cost that we might have to pay by doing the things that Jesus asks us to do, which may not be popular in the world. But the cost is as nothing compared to all we receive from God as we love him and follow him. And I really want to end, I suppose, these reflections just by saying that what can be received by putting our trust in the risen Jesus is so much greater than any cost we might have to pay. It's worth everything that we put into it, trusting and following Jesus. He is worth everything that we give to him, and he gives us so much more back in return. So let's just spend a moment praying as we finish. Father God, thank you for this picture of your great love for Peter, who had rejected Jesus, that Jesus would restore him with such love, would give him such an important task, even as someone who had denied that he knew you. And Lord, I pray that for each one of us, we might face our rebellion, our sin, but we might hear you restoring us and healing us. We'd hear what it is that you want us to do with our lives. we'd be prepared to respond to that call, however difficult it may be, knowing that in everything you will give us joy, you'll give us peace, you'll give us the promise of a life, a full life that will last not just for a few years, but for eternity in your presence. Thank you for everything that you give to us, Lord, and I pray that we grasp it with both hands as we fix our gaze on the risen Jesus, who is ascended at the right hand of the Father in heaven. Amen.